To the Climate Action Committee of the 9th of June 2022. It's great to have a few people here, and I see a few online. Just to let everybody know, in the room, councillor-wise, we have myself, Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Litchbark, and Councillor Teague. And online, it looks like we have Councillor Strange and Councillor Quayle. Yep, that looks about right. And today's meeting is running from 9:30-ish to 12:30, and we've got 5 items to cover. One of them is a kind of a general one to start. Then there are 2 items on adaptation mainly, and 2 items on emission reduction mainly. I was going to say that if we had more people in the room, I would have emphasised this more, but because of the way that our lights work, I was going to say if you just let me know by looking at me or at Dave, because then we don't get that confusion with the mics, but I think we might be okay. And for everyone online as well, if you want to put your hand up online, I'll take that order as well for speaking. I think we've got plenty of time to have a chat about things, so that'll be really good. I suppose we'll get the admin items out of the way. So apologies. I'm aware that we have an apology from Andrew McPherson and Katarina Hodge and Councillor Mahuta for a brief absence or early departure. Barry, I see you're online. Are you able to stay around for the whole meeting, or are you having to pop out as well?
I will be popping out for about 30 minutes or so, but I'll let you know online. Yeah,
all good. Thank you. Yeah, it's always handy in the chat. Then Dave will have the timing of it exactly as well. All right.
And Madam Chair, yes, I'll be leaving. I'm not sure when, but I'll have to pop out to a meeting too at some stage.
Okay. Thanks for the heads up. If you just let us know. If you let us know in the chat as well, then we'll know the time. Awesome. So we have a mover.
Second.
I'll move, and Councillor Litchbark seconds. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Awesome. That's a nice, easy one. Confirmation of the agenda. I gave a quick overview before. Main thing that I was going to say is it looks like Rick Lefting might be a little bit late to present item 6, so we may bump that back to allow him to arrive so that we get the full presentation as intended. Is everybody happy with the agenda? Yep, Dennis is happy to move. I'll second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Cool. And then any disclosures of interest? It's all just being received for information today at this stage. Okay, there are no disclosures. I don't see anything online. Then we can just skip over that. Karen, did you have any comments on today's meeting that you wanted to open with? No, you're happy? Cool. That sounds all good. So brief opening comments before I get the first speaker to come up, which will be for the Climate Action Roadmap update, Lisa Armstrong, I believe. I'll just mention, I've just recently had a look at our terms of reference, which we crafted about 2 years ago, and I think we're doing a fairly good job at delivering on that as far as you can when you've written something 2 years prior. And I'm really, really happy with the amount of integration of climate considerations into all our work streams. We've been fortunate to finally get lots of central government direction, and it keeps rolling in, but there have been some delays which have, well, it's frustrated me and I know many others, but in the meantime we've also had the latest IPCC reports out, which has been really helpful. And one of the main things that I put out there for people is how helpful it's been to have their narrative also shift from things we need to do in the far future to things that we need to be doing within the next 3 years. So the latest discussion has been emissions need to drop by 2025 or start dropping around that time, which I think is a really nice time frame that anybody can get their head around as opposed to 2030 or 2040 or 2050. And then with that central government direction, we've also had the ability to take this global issue down to a really local sense. So now that we've got a national emission reduction plan and soon a national adaptation plan, we can really start talking about regional and district and local versions of these things, which is when they become about our local landmarks that we care about and our actions that we can take, which will be really empowering. And so with that, let's head off into the first item. Lisa, would you like to come up?
Is this on? Maybe I can just make some introductory remarks while Lisa's taking her seat.
Good idea.
So thank you for your opening remarks, Chair. And really just to reiterate that climate change is a cross-cutting issue and it affects all part of the Regional Council, indeed all parts of society. And so we all have a responsibility to decarbonise our activities and ensure business resilience. And indeed, that's the integrating role of this committee, to share information, to provide evidence, and to ensure that your activities in other committees bring a climate lens into those work programs, decisions and responsibilities and actions. Similarly, staff have an advisory group that works across the organisation to ensure we too, in our everyday activities, incorporate climate response. The way we give effect to this is through following the directions laid out in the Climate Action Roadmap, the evidence-based pathways that we follow, 9 of these, and we have been steadily working through this document. And when people say, how do you implement a discussion document? It's you have the discussions with your stakeholders and with our iwi partners, and then we take it through the appropriate decision-making processes for the council to bring it into everyday response. So here in this paper, you have work to date since the inception of this committee and the planned forward work programme. As we highlight here, we are focusing on giving effect to the National Adaptation Plan, which will become legislation later in the year, or will certainly influence legislation toward the end of the year, and also the recent release of the Emissions Reduction Plan. Lisa, who has been working with us for some years now in various guises, has been absolutely instrumental in bringing together this work programme for the climate action, and is very much focused at the moment on a big piece of work, which we'll be discussing in greater detail with another item, and that's the Regional Climate Change Risk Assessment. So for now, we'll just pause, and you've got quite a lot of information there about what we've done and where we intend to go, and the priorities that we've set, with particular focus on work to incorporate these priorities into our long-term plan and to have a comprehensive business case for funding for the next long-term plan. And that work is starting now. So thank you. Lisa, did you want to make any introductory comments before taking questions?
It's all right. You just need to push the button until it's red. Other side?
Oh, fabulous. Thank you, Madam Chair. No introductory remarks, but if anyone would like to, has any questions in relation to the report, please let me know.
Sure. While I haven't got any hands up yet, I can just launch into my ones. So let's see. I'd mentioned before already, it's great integration already, but I thought it was interesting, as you said just then, Karen, ensuring that there are things going into the next long-term plan, and just bringing my sense of urgency. What avenues exist, and this is for either of you, for us to, if we identify something that needs to come into the next annual plan with the new triennium, that is a possibility. Do you have a way of bringing that to council for consideration?
If you identify a stream of work or a project that cannot be funded through business as usual, we would bring a case to the annual plan deliberations.
Okay. And will that also work the other way around in that you would bring something to us?
If it's identified.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Ted?
Yes, thanks. Look, you know, when you see the breadth of this information, it's really quite impressive. It's pity Councillor Witchwark isn't here because he made a comment to me. I'm not sure whether I'd say it when he's not here, but he made a comment that you know, some of the work we do is a bit academic, and I think this gives a lie to that. In fact, it's sort of across the whole organisation. So that's just an introductory comment. I'm just wondering whether, I know this might be a difficult ask for comms, but given the breadth of the information, but is there a possibility of having some sort of media statement on how far we've come, a bit like a report card? It might be hard to sort of encapsulate that into a short statement, but I just wonder whether they could give that a go.
I know that our comms advisor is online and
Right.
listening for potential story ideas, and I'm sure that this will be able
Right.
to be picked up and we can follow up after this meeting. And yes, there is a lot of information in the agenda here, and so it will be incumbent on us to make it interesting and also the further information available online.
I've just got a couple of queries. 1.9 relates to the Coast Care Program. And you know, there's a real great sense of social license with this work. I mean, people are really enthusiastic about it. But I'm just wondering whether we need a review of its actual effectiveness. You know, with increasing storm events, a lot of this work gets sort of washed away with erosion. It's item action 1.9 on page 21. That's not to criticise the work in any way, but I think, you know, just how effective actually is it turning out to be? And, you know, if a lot of it gets sort of destroyed, do we need to review whether that's a good, you know, use of resources? That's just one comment I'd have.
Thank you. We will take that on board, Councillor Tegg. And I'm looking to you, Councillor Kneeburn. There is a regular report on Coast Care effectiveness through to catchment committees, I believe. So we can certainly follow that up with a specific question, the effectiveness with respect to storm events. Thank you.
The second comment was 1.12 on page 22, the role of green infrastructure. And I think I see that sort of on the radar. It seems to me that I'd like to see that you know, come up the priority list, frankly, because you know, there's a whole burden of work that's been done, you know, to show the effectiveness of that work. I remember we shared a paper from overseas, I think with Rick at one stage, and it just strikes me it's not sufficiently on the radar. So, for example, the Thames Shoreline Management Program, I don't think they even really considered any of these options, you know, as a viable option for that project. So that's just another comment. And getting to my text here. And 4.5, the update of the criteria for the Environmental Initiative Fund. I think that's a good idea. I'm just wondering whether we need to extend that review to look at whether we do or don't follow the lead that Auckland City has taken, where they've gone for a specific climate fund and a targeted rate. It's one thing to review the existing fund, but you know, maybe we need to think about whether, you know, we go a bit bolder than that in terms of going out to the public, you know, with a targeted rate. And what surprised me from what I read yesterday was that in Auckland City, there was very strong support for it. So when they went out to public consultation on having a targeted rate, you know, several dollars a week, I think it would add up to. you know, the submissions that came back were supportive of it. And they also did an independent survey, which had a similar result. So maybe we need to be less fearful of that than maybe we imagined. I don't know, but I think it's just something we should be including in the review.
Yeah, from my understanding, the Environmental Initiatives Fund and the Natural Heritage Partnership funding is quite different from something like a targeted rate specifically for one topic. But I can see how one gave you the idea for the next. Yeah,
they're all part of the same mix. Yeah.
Thanks for the feedback. Angela, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hey, yeah, really impressive list of achievements over the course of this training. So yeah, well done to everyone involved. Just wondering if we could possibly, if it's appropriate, add in the establishment of the Waikato Transport Emissions Reduction Working Group into those achievements. That'd be fantastic. Yeah, it's a group that's you know, covers representation from the whole region, you know, looking at all aspects of transport. So it's not just passenger transport, also looking at freight and you know, transitioning private motor cars, you know, to electric vehicles as well. Also wondered if we could highlight how we could influence freight and commercial vehicles to move into lower emissions, probably through the RLTP. But yeah, just highlighting, I suppose, with that sustainable infrastructure, the, you know, critical transport links through, yeah, protecting those links from climate change. Yeah, that would probably be about all. Yeah. Oh, actually, one more. 5.1 outlines key work programs and projects. Just wondering if we could just add in a few more dates into there. Currently, the regional public transport plan is about to be approved. So yeah, it'd be great just to add a little bit more information onto that as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Angela. And I totally agree. I've been really appreciating being able to be a part of the Transport Emission Reduction Plan Working Group as a on the side, I suppose. And when I think about the region in the top 3 emission categories, being the other 2, other than transport, being energy and agriculture, those 2 are obviously then the next ones where, as part of an emission reduction plan for the region, I would see the focus going. Yeah. And I'm mindful that there is a piece mentioned in the report of what we're focusing on going forward, and that is one of the pieces, but we've been, I really appreciate the effort to keep advocating for not duplicating things. So there's a comment there around we are and working with our stakeholders around putting together a model with Becca that was brought up in previous meetings, but that currently there is quite a push within many councils to want to use the tool that has been used by the Climate Change Commission, so there can be some consistency. So really appreciate that, but also mindful that these things take time, which then slow us down. And so if we could put some thought into how to get the agriculture and the energy emission reduction plan pieces progressed, that would be really great in the meantime. And other things that I thought I could mention just now was, it really struck me when I looked over that list. I remember the community survey that we did and the messages that came back there of what the community was looking for from us as in a leadership role, as well as just in general what they wanted, which was wanting a clear vision, facilitated action plans and coordinated effort towards action on climate change, more education and engagement opportunities, and knowing what the biggest impact activities are, which is all stuff that we can provide, especially when there was quite a willingness for sharing resources and costs to help make those happen. So just really keen to say, let's keep going as we have been to deliver on those things, showing that leadership. And I noticed that things like the accord are still mentioned in the table as an idea whose time might have been a bit early, and so we've left it, and we'll be coming back to that. It's still on the list for bringing people together. One key thing I'm really interested in as well is the transition risks. So would you like to make a comment on those at all, Karen?
I wonder if we could bring that up when we talk.
All right, so we'll bring those up when we talk about the climate change risk assessment. And for me, the other three things that I'm interested in particularly are making sure that we do everything we can to progress the Transport Business Improvement Program to enable that rating system across all our public transport local authorities, because the sooner that is all working smoothly, the better we can provide public transport services, and transport is just that topic where we can move fast if this kind of stuff is possible, like it wasn't before. And the investigating how the Waikato can benefit from others, including ourselves, who want to offset emissions. So how can we invest locally as opposed to saying something's carbon neutral and having invested somewhere else? So there's plenty of land in the Waikato that if we manage to get all our ducks in a row with voluntary carbon market or whatever it might be, that would be a real achievement. And the last one was, I think there's a space that we might be able to play in helping more resilient energy network in our region as well. And I'm talking about community-owned energy, renewable energy and storage, and all sorts of things that lead to peak shaving abilities and all that stuff. So those were all the things on my list, but happy.
And we will put them in the prioritisation discussion that we have as the staff advisory group. So thank you.
Thanks
I
very
just
much.
have one other.
Yeah, Councillor Teague.
Yeah, so actually Angela's comments have prompted me to think of another initiative. What we've got going is the sort of informal EV working group, which has been established to liaise with other territorial councillors about how we rationalise EV charging infrastructure across the region.
Yes. Yes, it's under the Waikato Plan Climate Workstream.
Okay, right.
And on that, I think I saw something in the National Emission Reduction Plan about a whole lot more EV charging in national. So that'll be great for them to pick up on and work through that. Okay. Well, Lisa, that seemed like it was very simple for you. There's literally no questions for you. But don't leave. Oh, Councillor Nevone. Did you have one for Lisa, perhaps?
No, it's not really. Well, it sort of is a question, I suppose. Look, like the others, it's an impressive list. I guess the thing that struck me reading through it, and a good example is Dennis's comment on green infrastructure. When I think of the likes of the Peninsula project, that's effectively, I see that as a green infrastructure approach to a certain degree in terms of mitigating, erosion and all that sort of thing, and flooding and impacts of flooding and things like that. And one of the challenges that I find reading through this is that a whole bunch of the stuff we've been doing anyway, it's kind of BAU, but obviously there's a lot of opportunity to build on that and improve on it. Was some of the other things, such as the commentary we just had on transport a few minutes ago, is obviously an ability to move past that baseline, so and there's going to be a whole bunch of our BAU where we've got opportunities to move past that baseline too, and it's making, I don't know how we do it, how we identify those so that we don't get complacent by looking at this great list of the great things we're doing, if that makes sense,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Otherwise, we think we're moving ahead, but we may not be, because at the end of the day, we've got to try and move past that baseline, and if we're to make a difference and justify our existence in terms of this committee and its work.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kneebone. We absolutely agree. And I think it is noted as a line in the report, much of this is business as usual. And that's why we, as a staff group, hold ourselves to account to see this is business as usual, but what next? And what will achieve the outcomes we're seeking across all well-beings. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I add a further comment?
Please.
Please, just to add that with the emissions reduction plan and then the upcoming release of the final national adaptation plan, we'll be carrying out a really big piece of work to review what we're doing to say, okay, what is that national direction providing? And for example, in the draft national adaptation plan, there's a huge list of an appendice with a large number of actions. So we'll be working through that to actually say, okay, what is coming from central government, you know, to avoid that duplication? What then should we be focusing our energies and effort on?
Thanks for that, Lisa. Yeah, I want to just comment how when you have a desire not to duplicate, it's, from what I understand, been difficult without central government direction, because we could be spending a whole lot of money, ratepayers' money, on developing things that then we have to totally pivot in the other direction. So every single piece that does come down from central government is so appreciated, so that at least we can all get behind it. And I'm just so mindful, and I've carried it as quite a weight on my shoulders as well, that we're making up for time. The kind of things that we've been doing in the past few years should have been happening a long time ago. And that my impression is that with the public, the expectation will be rising very rapidly at some point for us to have done it all, basically. So there are the 3 stages that are described for the climate conversation, and there's the first stage that thankfully we're past, which was the denial stage. Then there's the delay and that kind of like we're getting going stage, and then the next stage is people saying, why didn't you tell me about this? This sounds really horrible, and we've got to move really quickly. So to get ourselves ready for the stage where the absolute masses are wanting to have the conversations about adaptation and emission reduction in their everyday lives is what I want us to be ready for, to say to the Waikato community, there is stuff in play and there are things that are happening. And what I'm really grateful for is that so much of it is structurally embedded in the system sense, so that the action on the ground will be well supported by those structures. So. But I'll stop talking and we can, if there are no more questions, say thank you, Lisa, but please stay there so that we can go on to the next item. I'll just do what we need to do here about receiving the report. Councillor Tegg, you happy to move? Councillor Kneebone, second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. All right, so Lisa, the local climate change risk assessment. Would you like to introduce?
Or Karen, would you like to, as the executive sponsor, or? Okay, so work is well underway on our regional climate change risk assessment. So just by way of I'll take the report as read, but just we're currently in the process of carrying out our stakeholder workshops. So this afternoon, after this committee meeting, we have our stakeholder workshop this afternoon for 2 hours, facilitated by Tonkin and Taylor. Then tomorrow morning we have our iwi partner workshop to apply a Te Ao Māori lens to climate risk in the region. So from both of those workshops we will be gathering the information that is shared and drawing on the local knowledge and expertise of, you know, stakeholders and sectors across our region, including other local government organisations, and we'll be updating that into our risk identification workbook, which is our key deliverable for this first part of the project, so phase 1. So from phase 1, we will then be sharing the risk identification workbook with our stakeholders in region as a tool for everyone to use, and then scoping based on the information that has come from those surveys and the risk workbook and the workshops, working through what we actually need to do as a region to understand and assess climate risk in our region. So this stage, phase 1 and then phase 2, when we're scoping further projects, which may include detailed risk assessments and further projects to fill information gaps, both of those are what we, in terms of the risk assessment process, classes assessing and understanding. From there, we'll have a really good body of information to help inform adaptation responses.
And just adding to Lisa's comments, we have been gratified by the degree to which our stakeholders engaged with the survey, more than double the responses that other regions have experienced. So we have a welter of information, rich information about the physical risks, moving into the risks that flow on from those immediate physical risks, leading into a discussion about the transition risks. And this is an area that we will have to spend more time developing up to come back for conversations. Transition risks haven't, to date, as far as we understand, been well canvassed or looked at through this process. So, sorry, Lisa's saying that she's got some information. So what is that, Lisa?
Oh, I was just going to add, in terms of transition risks, in the survey that went out to our stakeholders and staff, we did ask people to explore and highlight any transition risks that they might have been aware of. And so we have captured that information, but we found that with the workshops, we've received so much information about the physical risks and the indirect risks that for the workshops, we've said, well, look, we really need to focus on physical risks. There is just too much to get through. Transition risks take a slightly different approach in terms of how we address and understand and even talk about those. So we've decided that in phase 2, we'll carry out a more detailed piece of work on that. But we will be still using the information that our stakeholders have shared in the survey as part of our reporting back about this project on transition risks.
Okay, thank you.
Could
you give an example of a transition risk, just for anyone if they're not very clear on what that might sound like? Yeah.
Yeah. So transition risks are about risks that are arising from moving to a low carbon economy. And so those risks might be relevant to our institutions or to our communities or to different sectors in our economy. And it's actually really difficult. It's actually difficult to really clearly, we've had lots of discussion and debate as a project team and also with our consultants as well about getting clarity between transition risks and what are indirect and cascading risks. They're really quite clear, but probably the key way to define it is the risks of transitioning to a low carbon economy. And I'm just trying to think of a good example right now. Karen, you might have one that springs to mind.
Land use change as a result of policy signals, for example. That would be a really fundamental transition risk because of the changing markets, changing direction from government, and the signals that sends to landowners and decisions they would make in response to change land use, for example.
Yeah, and a further, I guess, more community, through you, Madam Chair, a further community type example of a transition risk is, if it becomes really difficult or expensive to run a fossil fueled car, what are the impacts of those on our community to actually, participate in life as we know it? Because, certain parts of society won't be able to afford to travel as much. So it's really difficult to draw a line sometimes between those transition risks and adaptation risks as well.
Yes.
And I was talking to Jen about this
Councillor
morning.
Nevone, yep.
We have to remember, and the ag sector is a really good example, there's no doubt in my mind that the government are really torn with how hard they tax the ag sector, because they do rely on ag sector receipts and export receipts to fund health and welfare and all those sort of things, So I see that as a transition risk at a big scale too,
Yeah, it sounds to me that if I was to brainstorm it, I would really struggle to delineate adaptation transition risk from emission reduction transition risks, because ultimately those two categories overlap much more than we give them credit for in the information coming down from central government and so forth. But it does sound like something that would be really cool for us to, as an organisation, to focus on. I don't think that there are others better placed, other than obviously central government, who will do what they do, to help our communities with that, because a lot of them will be similar across districts, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly, Madam Chair. And then also then when you sort of bring into the concept of indirect and cascading and knock-on risks as well, it really is, quite a, complex beast really. But what we've decided as a project is, with the information that's coming in, in terms of gathering the information from our stakeholders, we haven't been too focused on saying, okay, this has to fit into this box or that box. The focus is gathering that information in so we can actually then understand it and work with it, and then, plan appropriately to respond to those risks.
Oh, should be pretty exciting when we get to that, hopefully soon. I have a question for yourself, Karen, and that is mainly when we were going through a submission the other day in strategy and policy, I noted in the past in this committee, we've talked about developing a regional adaptation plan after seeing a national adaptation plan. But since that was devised over 2 years ago when we wrote the terms of reference, what is your latest thinking on how this local risk assessment information will lead to a plan of sorts, but perhaps by a different name?
There we go. No, I'm on. Thank you. And we can also look to Blair to flesh this out, because he certainly is our resource management expert. But yes, we did anticipate at the time that we would do the risk assessment that would feed into an adaptation plan for the region. But in actual fact, we think it'll provide content and information that will then inform the regional spatial strategy, which will provide a far more integrated and far-reaching approach to indeed climate change, but also the region's infrastructure, its people, and across all well-beings.
I like that approach, because again, it's integrating into something that we're doing anyway as another piece, a strand of that, as opposed to writing a separate climate document that you then have to separately refer to. So that sounds efficient. Thank you. Councillor Teague.
Yeah, I just had a thought about it. What might define a transition risk, for example, as we transition to electric vehicles. If you own a petrol station, then maybe your margins are going to be squeezed, and those vehicles will require less maintenance. So if you're, in a workshop, a mechanic, you're going to have less work to do in the future. So those, I think, are some of the sort of flow-on effects that I think we're talking about. All right.
All right. Takeaway is we're very interested in transition risks. Awesome. Councillor Troy.
Yeah, flowing on from that, the charges, are there going to be sufficient charges, and are we going to have to burn more coal to, make power to, yeah. But I mean, unintended consequences, have we got enough solar farms forecast to take up that ability? I know I'm cross table talks workshopping, but
No, any change is going to have a risk of some sort. And when we capture that, then you'll see opportunities that need addressing, right?
Look,
to help our communities.
There'll be new doors opening for those mechanics. And like what we talked about before about assisting landowners to suck up carbon on land that's no longer viable or productive land, to assist them getting trees on that land. I'd really like to see the council being more proactive too, and having an example on the ground that people can actually see, rather than, and I understand why we need all the reports, where we're heading, blah, blah, but absolutely, I want to see something on the ground, and that's what everybody wants.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. No, I hear you.
Well, we might as well have a debate about this while we're here. I think
I'll let it go,
like a bit of a myth that the fossil fuel industry seem to promote. We had a presentation from one of the executives from Transpower came to this committee, and he didn't identify that as a problem. The change to renewable energy that we've already got lined up and consented will be enough to see us through for some time, and then we will need further investment. But we've got Lake Onslow being considered, and then there's 3 or 4 solar farms already on the go in the Waikato alone, and there's offshore wind off Taranaki as being big players involved in that. So we don't need to go to coal. We can go with the renewable energy.
Very last one.
And
then we're going to
I know
stop
it's
it.
cross-talk and debate, but this is the very information that needs to get out there, so you can immediately cut the disinformation that's being supplied. Because what I just said that got Dennis reactive is out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we need to put the right narratives of experts that we're talking to out there, because the Regional Council is a credible organisation that talks to these people.
And I don't want to buy an electric car if it means burning coal.
Yeah.
And that's the mentality that you want.
And I'm mindful that Chair Barry Quayle has been very supportive as well of this proactive pushing of correct information in the whole climate space. So I know Inga from Comms is online. Please take that in as a note as well. All right, well, we will call that one to a close since I don't see anybody else with anything else there. Councillor Strange, would you like to move this one?
Yes, happy to move. Thank you.
Realise you've been online. And Councillor Quayle, would you like to second? We have Councillor Truck second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Lisa. Looks like we've got Rick here. Shall we? Kia ora, Rick. Would love to have you come present on the climate adaptation guideline that you've been working on with Sophie Marsh. I understand is away today, so it's nice to have you here to represent you both. Just put on your mic, please. When it's red. Other side. Perfect.
Kia ora.
Rick.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And yeah, just like to acknowledge the great work that Sophie Marsh has done on this project. She just not here today. She's actually on her overseas experience somewhere in Indonesia at the moment. So this is one of her passing gifts to the Regional Council before she left. So
Awesome.
Thank you. So I will take the report as read. I won't do too much of a corridor around the guidelines, but just wanted to say that the guidelines are there to assist both internal WRC staff and also our partners and external stakeholders as well. The climate change field, especially around adaptation, is I wouldn't say fragmented, but there's a lot of information that's in different parts of climate change networks, both nationally and in other areas as well. And for practitioners, it's been quite difficult to try and understand where everything is and which is the latest bit of information to apply to a climate adaptation plan. So the guidelines are there to collate all that information into one stop and to provide guidance around what our latest understandings are on adaptation processes, where to get the information and how do we proceed with community adaptation plans or other projects that need to adapt to climate change in the future. So we're just collating a lot of information basically, and to assist practitioners to make their job a little bit easier. We're also quite conscious of the dynamic space that we are in at the moment. We're all on a climate change journey and things are changing very, very quickly in terms of our available information. So it's really important that both Regional Council and territorial authorities, iwi and our other partners and stakeholders are up to the play on what is the latest and greatest. So we aim to have the guidelines as a living document and have it updated as required, and also have annual reviews to make sure it is the one-stop shop for climate change adaptation information for the Waikato region. So I'd like to pause there, and through the chair, if there are any questions or comments and feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that regional councils placed well to deliver for people, to make it easier based on all the complex stuff out there. So really appreciate the initiative to get this one going, and understand it's for practitioners. So it is going to be complex to a level that the general public would still find perhaps difficult at times, but the practitioners are the ones that obviously we want to support to get it done, because since they're tasked with the role. I understand it's still in quite a bit of a draft phase, and you were just keen to get feedback from us. That's where we're at.
That's right. So the report has gone through internal review, and we've had a number of workshops with staff and especially subject matter experts to provide their input. And in fact, some of those subject matter experts within council have actually contributed to the guidelines. And we've also had the guidelines externally reviewed by James Hughes from Tonkin and Taylor, who's been quite involved with climate change adaptation at a national level, and is involved with the risk assessment work as well that we're currently undertaking.
Thanks for that. I've met James, and yeah, really have seen a lot of his work. It's been great, so appreciate that. Councillor Tegg,
Thanks.
First off.
Great piece of work. I'm really thrilled about this. I think it'll be incredibly useful to stakeholders, other territorial authorities. So well done. Yeah, fantastic stuff. Just wondering whether there's a couple of things I'd mention. There's the section on the legislative requirements. I just wonder whether it would be useful to cross-check with a legal review that Lawyers for Climate Action have just put out. It's more from the public's point of view rather than stakeholders, but just run this across that. I think there's a bit of a gap, in case I've missed something somewhere, but I don't see any mention of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and the policies and objectives relating to coastal hazards. I think that needs to be included, frankly, because it's so vital to the way planners in particular approach, this whole issue. So I'd like to see that in. And the MFE guidance, is that mentioned? Did I miss something?
The MFE guidance should be mentioned, yeah, definitely, because that's quite a significant input into how we are undertaking adaptation within the region. So
I understand it's being reviewed, and it was last came out in 2017, and an updated review is sort of due. So I was pleased to hear you say this is a living document and will be reviewed annually, because when that MFE review comes out, it may need some update. The only omission, other one I'd mention, dear to my heart, there is a case study on Thames in the sea level rise website, which may be worth mentioning. I'd like a link to it just to show that information.
Yeah, we do refer to the NZ Rise work in that section, and and in terms of the way that we incorporate that NZ Rise data into our adaptation plans, that's still to come from MFE with an update, hopefully soon. I've seen some initial drafts, but there's still some work done on that actual application of that information into real-world planning. Yeah.
Finally, there is a commentary around the use of the RCP scenarios versus the latest ones in IPCC. Can you just go through the rationale as to why the RCP ones were chosen?
Yes, because the MFE guidance does not have the latest SSP information. So the guidance that we've had from MFE and from NIWA, who wrote most of that report, was to continue using the RCP work scenarios. Now, there's not a huge amount of difference between the two, but definitely once we have national guidance that we can sort of hang our hat on, then this guidance will refer to that information. So we're on a journey still, and some of that information and guidance is lagging behind what we already know. So it's difficult for a regional council to go ahead of the game. We need to wait for that national guidance to come on board, and then we can follow them.
Thanks. Councillor Truck, yeah.
Oh, look, I'd just like to include what I learned yesterday when I went to the biosecurity Plant Plus seminar in Hamilton, workshop in Hamilton, and the diseases now that are potentially coming into New Zealand that will kill 1,000-year-old trees in 3 years' time, and other risks that are potentially huge risks through nurseries not knowing the precautions that we need to take now to prevent the spread of these diseases. And this regional council is probably one of the, or potentially could be one of the biggest risks distributing plant disease throughout our region through purchasing plants and dispersing plants from nurseries that aren't up to speed with plant hygiene and taking those precautionary approaches. So really serious implications. And it's, I think, really staff like catchment managers and the plant procuring people need to start to get a handle on that as well. And it's all as a result of climate change. Thank you.
Did you have a response for that, Rick or Karen? Just as a,
How
well you think it's covered already versus what else could be discussed with teams?
Again, we're still on a journey around how we are to adapt to those changes as well. And this hopefully sort of captures where we are at the moment. So when we start to get some further guidance around how we address those issues, then we can put into here. But we've got a biodiversity and biosecurity team here at council that is looking at those issues as well. So while this provides the general guidance, there's still another level of assessment and information that is underneath and underpins some of this work as well. So we're still keeping abreast of everything that's going on, but at that more specific discipline level. Makes sense?
Yeah.
Stu, can you just turn your mic off so that, thanks.
I could see, MPI is rolling this out now with New Zealand plant growers, and Auckland Regional Council are right across it, and other regional councils are across it. And I was a little surprised that there was no representation from regional council, where it is really quite such a serious or potentially extremely high risk. So yeah, I think it's something that should most definitely be, in here as a priority. Thank you.
Okay, so we've taken that as a note to. Awesome. Councillor Kneebone.
Rick, I'm not sure if it's your area or not, or maybe Blair, but is anyone in a position, or do we know whether these guidelines will form part of the reference, for want of a better word, when the new RMA amendments come in terms of having to take climate change and its effects into consenting decisions?
It will assist. Again, this is providing the background to climate change, and obviously once the new reforms come through, we'll need to update this as well because we don't know what's going to be coming through those. But the other parts of this guideline is to understand the how. How do we address, or how do we understand the climate changes, and how do we adapt to that? So that portion will still be evolving and will form, part of the key processes to, I would assume, meet the guidance of the new reforms coming forward. So we still, while the reforms are coming, we still need to understand the physical environments,
Yeah.
understand how they may change in the future. But it looks like Blair's got some more commentary on that, so I'll let Blair take over.
Yeah, please, Blair.
There's a difference, councillors, there's a difference between national direction and national guidance.
Yeah.
Rick's talking about national guidance and the relationship and providing regional guidance to us in the way we address the national direction that we get. I'll cover the national direction from the emissions reduction side of things, but it's very similar for adaptation.
Yeah, because look, I'm really struggling to understand. I mean, we know, for example, if we just take agriculture, the issuing of a consent for a standard farming activity is going to have impacts in terms of climate change. There's going to be a real tension there as to whether or not those consents are granted, and who decides how we divvy up. So it's a bit like allocating nutrient discharge rights, you know.
So, Councillor Nevo, we were actually really keen to have a report at this meeting about the topic of guidance from MFE around consenting, and because that was all meant to come into play, I think it was 31st of December or 1st of January of this year, but then that was delayed, and as I understand the direction or guidance of how our Resource Use Directorate apply that has been delayed, and hence that's why they're not going to put it into force until I think it's the 1st of November. Is that right, Blair? Yeah, so Blair will have a chat about that. Yeah, but it would have been great. But again, it's just showing the importance of having that national direction to be able to answer these questions, which are good questions. But if you go speculating too much, then might be getting upset down the whole wrong track, basically. Okay. I've got something for you, Rick, as well, on this one. So I read it front to back. That was fun. Although the table of contents did give me a scare. But I noticed that the executive summary, the introduction, and the purpose used a lot of the same paragraphing and wording. Wherever possible, if we can condense that, I think would just help the reader, because even I, who am super engaged, I felt like I was having to really trudge through for a bit. So that's one thing. And the only other part was around, there were several pages on the agenda. It's page 50, page 53 and 64 that I took note of myself, where we're doing the sciencey thing, and as a trained scientist I know what that is, which is to not be absolute about stuff. And so it says things like, although there is uncertainty as to the level of climate change that will occur, or we acknowledge that climate change impacts are still uncertain and will continue to take shape. Or the other one was 64, which was, and the rate and magnitude of this change is unknown due to uncertainty. And unfortunately, the word uncertainty has just been ruined by the denials and the delays. And so wherever it might be possible to not go too far in any direction, but to refer to the latest science, say from the IPCC, and insert that there to say, currently we are on track for this, but implementation gaps mean that we are on track for this, just to show the magnitude of what we are kind of heading for, as opposed to just saying it's all uncertain, because in the past that word of climate change is uncertain has just created so many problems for the world. So the more, and I'm mindful actually when we got to the 10-year strategy, which was mentioned in the document, the second bullet point was around communicating climate change appropriately. And I think it's really important that we do communicate it in a way that even in perception, it is accurate to what the scientists of the IPCC are saying is the situation we're in, which is actually quite dire. So would you have any comment on that for me back?
So The commentary around the
I know what
uncertainty.
it's trying to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think you probably know what I'm going to say as well. So we have, whether they're the older RCPs or the SSPs, we have a range of trajectories. And that's where the uncertainty is when we're looking at 100 years, while we have some guidance at the moment around where we are heading, the guidance is showing us that there is an envelope of potential climate change and what that would result in on the ground, and how do you adapt for that. So that is also the uncertainty is also at the heart of an adaptation plan, where we need to acknowledge that there are some uncertainties or exactly where we may be in 50 to 100 years, and we need a process to be able to manage that uncertainty as best we can. So that's what it's meant by uncertainty. Other wording to use in that, I mean, that's uncertainty has been used in a lot of other climate change literature as well. But we can have a chat around how you think best we can maybe massage that word a little bit better. Message.
Yeah. No, that's it. The messaging of the perception, if it comes across, because but I suppose being written for practitioners, they would understand that fairly quickly. It's just been ruined, that word, a little bit, one scientist to another. But just to make sure that, because I know we're talking about timeframes, like coastal policy statements talking 100 years, and notice in here we're talking about 2090, and those are obviously timeframes that we kind of struggle with as humans, and there are things that are already baked in, as they say, and the actions that we're asking people to take, or decisions we're asking them to make now, while they need to be aware of the uncertainty of the far future, there is less uncertainty in the near future. Yeah, and if we can message it in that way, I think that would totally address that. Sure. Thanks. Yeah. Glad I got that kind of across somehow. Okay.
Yeah, look, so next steps, I mean, there's been great feedback come through, and we want to incorporate that feedback into the report. It is still draft, and we kept it draft to make sure that we could capture this great feedback. So I'm wondering whether, if you do have some formal commentary, and can come back to myself, and we can do another draft and come back to. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's well on track. So thanks very much. I hope it's very helpful to lots of people, and I imagine that there are possibly even more than what was on the table in the report of people who would be really interested in that. So whatever channels we can think of over time, once it is final, be really good to get it out there. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rick. In that case, no other lights. So
you just
Dennis,
when the appropriate time comes, again thinking about the comms side.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to move this one. Councillor Kneebone, second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Receiving reports is such a straightforward one. Thank you, Rick. Right, then we're going on to the next item, which is the the National Emission Reduction Plan. And I believe it's Blair presenting to us on that. So while Blair's coming up, I mean, the National Emission Reduction Plan is another one of those things that was delayed sometime by central government, but here we have it now. And I believe yesterday as well, the He Waka Eke Noa work was presented. So you're touching on that as well, aren't you, Blair?
Yes, I will be.
Awesome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this. What I thought I would do is just highlight some of the main points and particularly pick up on some of the matters that you have already discussed in the previous items. The National Emissions Reduction Plan came from the Climate Change Response Act, changes in 2019, and it requires the development of a emissions reduction plan to meet our international obligations, and effectively It is a plan which brings central government activities together, and there were certainly comments made before in relation to the work that my colleague Lisa presented on the way we're addressing climate mitigation and adaptation regionally as being BAU. Well, it's BAU with a different lens, and with central government, they're doing pretty much the same thing with this. And what it shows is there's a lot of government departments that have been picked up with this, and they're identifying what activities they will be doing to meet emission targets. The National Emissions Reduction Plan came out. There's been a number of opportunities for us to influence what we've got. Originally, it came out with advice from the Climate Change Commission, and we submitted on that through, I think, this committee and through the submissions committee. We then had a draft that was aligned with national direction and national policy statement and environmental standards on process heat, because part of the Resource Management Amendment Act 2020 repealed Section 70A and Section 104E, which prevented us from treating greenhouse gas emissions as contaminant to the environment. So that comes off, and central government was looking at direction to align with that. It came out as a package, and the package all go back to the, well, two of them of these parts of the package go back to the Climate Change Response Act, and one of it was the government's release, I think it was the 9th of May, of the next three 5-yearly carbon emissions budgets, and they are identified in your item on page 95, paragraph 9, which show a sinking lid of, and it's best to look at that last figure, because you'll see that when you look at how many million tonnes of CO2 are budgeted for emissions, it's actually the second 5-yearly period, 2026 to 2030, is actually greater than the current one. That's because we're already in the current one and it's only 4 years. So that's the reason for that. So it's best to look at the final figure, and you can see that that is a 5-year on 5-year, a decrease on an annual basis. So what this does is sets up the government's activities and as lead agency for reducing emissions, but it needs a plan to achieve that. So we've got the budgets. They came out in the emissions budget on the 9th of May. On the 16th of May, we had the National Emissions Reduction Plan. And on the 19th of May, we had the financial budget just for a year. So it's a different sort of budget. And that really shows that what we've got here is central government's push to reduce emissions with incentives, incentivising a lot of sectors and industries to reduce the way they use energy to a more sustainable and less carbon amount. So the key elements, and I've just got to find my place here, so I don't want to repeat things. So what this paper does is goes through a little bit of a example of what type of changes the government is proposing in the plan for those sectors. It recognises that the ag sector, responsible for about half of the country's emissions and 70% of our emissions, is pretty lightly done in comparison, and that's because the government is already working with the ag sector through the He Waka Eke Noa process, which had an initial proposal recommendations released yesterday. So we've had a bit of an initial look at that. But paragraphs 17 to 20 on page 96 and 97 really just go through the key elements of the plan. What the paper then does is look at how that relates to local government, first by just doing a bit of a rough count up of the actions, and there's about 300 of them, and over 100 require partnerships with local government. There's other partners as well, industries and things like that, but that really gives you a bit of a feel for the need for local government input for the government to get what it wants done on this. And I've been pretty generous with my criteria. It's not just regional councils, we're a subset of those 114 actions, but it includes things like landowners, and some councils own land. And it includes things like when it talks about public agencies, and particularly for building consent authorities in relation to warmer homes and things like that, which is a territorial function, not a regional council function. So don't get too spooked. It's less direct influence for us. What I also do is look at the implications for this council, and they're particularly in three areas. The existing activities under the RMA, the potential role of the reformed resource management system, and that's from what we know at the moment, and also in our service delivery role, those areas where we support communities by providing services, and that's all carried out through the LGA and our LTP annual plan system, so there's some relevance there. Paragraph 26 to 32 talk about the current system, and when we look at the transitional program and processes that are likely to be put in place to the new system, we're talking development of nationally, the National Planning Framework, which is national direction. We're then talking about, once there's enough of that, we're talking about a staged development of regional spatial strategies. Then, following that, regional scale combined plans. So realistically, we're looking at a 7 to 10 year transition. So it's worth looking at how this impacts and the current system, because we're going to be with that current system for at least another couple of council terms anyway. Now, I make the point that from 2004, we've had to address the reasonably foreseeable effects of climate change in our decision making, and also with respect to renewable electricity generation. So that's the only element. So we've already sort of picked up some elements of that, and particularly the review of our geothermal policy and our regional energy strategy was targeted towards that element of this. We've also received a draft of the Indigenous Biodiversity National Policy Statement, and that requires regional scale spatial strategies. And one of the roles of those spatial strategies is to, among a whole lot of co-benefits, to recognise where carbon sequestration from native vegetation will be. And also, as part of the Resource Management Amendment Act 2020, changes were made to Section 61, 66 and 74. Don't worry about 74, that's district plans, but 61 is the contents of regional policy statement, and 66 is regional plans. And from the 30th, and this is what came up before, from the 30th of November this year, 1st of December, and it was delayed, but the rationale was it was delayed so that it could be combined with the budgets and of both types, the emissions budgets and the financial budget so that it is a package. And that
That's
seemed to have some
understandable.
rational sort of basis, and it makes sense, and it was good because we could sort of see what it meant and how much the government was prepared to pay to rather than ask a lot of questions. So that's what that happened, but it also delayed some other things. So from the 30th of November this year, we have to have regard to the emissions reduction plan, and we will also have to have regard to the National Adaptation Plan. And that is in our RM decision making. So that's when we're developing policy statements and plans. So it does have a link into our work program that we have at the moment. And I've talked to Bruce McAuliffe, manager of that section, and he advises me that the coastal plan is well down the track, but it will be proposed following the 30th of November this year. And so he assures me that that's being looked at, and the freshwater policy changes are really just in their initial stages of working out what they need to do. So it's well able to be picked up at that stage. So I don't think you should have any concerns that that's not happening. There is a element of the National Emissions Reduction Plan and the National Adaptation Plan will also be able to be picked up as part of the other matters in consenting decisions. Certainly we don't have a consenting role with the discharge of contaminants and greenhouse gas as contaminants until 30 November, after 30 November this year. But once this, because this emissions reduction plan is in place now, it is something we may choose to pick up if it's relevant in a consenting role. And to that extent, there's probably a bit of in paragraph 32, I made the statement that the ERP can be introduced into the process for consideration of consent applications from 30 November 22. That's not strictly correct. That's in relation to the repeal of section 70 and 104. It's arguable that it perhaps could be picked up now. So but it's on a case-by-case basis. Next thing I'd like to go through is the post-reform of the RM system. And of course, climate change is one of the 5 objectives of that, occasioning the reform. And there's 2 ways that this can be picked up. And what we're seeing is that it's going to be that just reading the ERP, it's very clear that it is much wider application than just in the RM permitting system. And so what the likely mechanism we can expect this to have is a input into what's known as the National Planning Framework, and that will provide national direction. So that isn't going to be developed, and we don't see that until after the legislation is in place. So we're not expecting that till next year. So that's where that comes in. But what certainly became is clear is that there will be a requirement to produce regional spatial strategies, and those regional spatial strategies will need to be directed by the National Planning Framework. So our spatial emissions reduction elements will be included in that. And you can sort of just see things like land use change, and it's a very, the conversation before about transition risks. I mean, land use change, is it a transition to for emissions reduction to go to solar and wind for a land use and energy cropping as an alternative to coal? Or is it an adaptation transition risk because the current land use is challenged because of lack of rainfall?
Yep.
You know, there's so much things that interconnect here, and they're two sides of the same coin. So, you know, you can slice it and dice it in a number of ways, but this is the way, you know, we're going to have to deal with both.
It's
So
good
in
to
some-
understand that the regional spatial strategy will have both.
Yeah, it's
because it would be too hard to separate anyway if you wanted to be academic about it.
It's an integrator, and you'll be aware, and you mentioned it, Madam Chair, the submission on the draft National Adaptation Plan that was that the Submissions Committee actually requested that the local risk assessments be made mandatory so that the Climate Commission had enough information to develop the next one, and that we recognise that for adaptation, and it's no different for emissions reduction, because it is you know, so interconnected, that we see the regional spatial strategies as being the ideal instrument to bring everything together on that one. Where were we? And one of those things that those regional emissions reductions certainly can be seen to address is found in paragraph 35, where, you know, you can see areas of coastal marine area suitable for marine energy generation, electricity generation, sorry. Areas of urban growth in ways that reduce the requirement for people to use their own cars, density and that sort of thing. Areas of forests and wetlands to sequester opportunities and also maximise co-benefits there. And energies for areas for energy forests close to final use. Those are the two sort of areas of this report that relate to our regulatory functions, but also our service delivery functions are going to be picked up as well. And this relates to the LTPs and annual plans, and recognises that we local government and ourselves provide services to the community, and we have a role to do that in a low carbon way. Just to note that as a consequence of the last LTP round, the Office of the Auditor General did go through and look at how district and regional councils had addressed climate change in their long-term plans. They did a report on that, and they said that some of them were pretty iffy on whether they should, to the extent that they could do that. I think that has changed quite considerably with the fact that we now are in a position of developing the next round of plans with the benefit of the emissions reduction plan, and we will have the benefit of the adaptation plan. And just to note that next week, Tautora, the local body staff capacity building, is holding a climate change forum, and one of the papers there will be the Office of the Auditor General outlining expectations of how this will be picked up. So we'll learn that. And we've got some follow-up work to do, because this all came out real close to the report writing time. And that's probably enough. And there's a infographic at the end.
I appreciate that. And thank you so much for pulling, because mindful it's over 350 pages for the ERP document. So for you to pull this together as to how it applies to us in such a short period of time is really appreciated, as well as you taking us through it, because even though I read it, I still learned something new. So thank you. I don't see any lights on yet. I'll just have a look at my notes. I see in the follow-up work, so there's a chance for us to have another submission on this. I didn't quite understand that fully. I thought perhaps the ERP is what it is now. So
it is.
Yeah.
We won't have a opportunity to make changes to the emissions reduction plan that is reported on here. The Environment Select Committee is investigating whether the budget, because they get an opportunity to inquire into the budget, and what they have decided to do is to see if the budget is sufficient to meet that. So there is elements there. Certainly, we know where the council's thoughts are. There's an opportunity to provide feedback to the select committee, and certainly that could be done at the staff level. The benefits of that would be that that the Climate Change Commission is charged with reviewing the performance and the implementation of this, and undoubtedly it will be taking the select committee's recommendations into account.
Yep.
And so if there is some elements there, it is an advocacy role, but there's no chance of changing the plan.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
that makes sense, but
yeah.
obviously, yeah, if there are
and
things.
that can be done at the staff level,
Great,
should it be your wish.
thank you. Now, where there's value in it for us to succeed further because our comments get heard more, it would make sense to make them. But if things are well on track with how we can see them being implemented, then Councillor Tegg and then Councillor Chua.
Thanks, Blair. Really useful summary. Good to read it. I have a question around your paragraph 32, and I'm interested in the sort of transitional arrangements as we get into this new regime. So you're saying that the provisions are not retrospective in terms of changing policy plans. So I'm just wondering, given that our regional policy statement now won't be notified until next year, will we have to review that plan in the light of what's come through in these changes?
Through you, Madam Chair, the regional policy statement is operative from 2016. Are you talking about a change
Well, the
with
review,
NPS
the current
UD?
review that we're undertaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Variation, is it?
I'm just thinking things around like sequestration and egress.
My understanding was that it was limited to the NPS urban development. I might have got that wrong. And if it's being proposed after the 30th of November, it falls into the same category as the coastal plan.
Sorry, I'm not quite. I know you're a bit sucky, but I haven't quite understood your answer. So do you think we have to review it in the light of this new information or not, new legislation?
My reading of the 2020 Amendment Act is yes, any change to the regional policy statement or the regional plan must have regard to the ERP and the NAP after that time.
And given the length of time it takes to review plans, one of the issues is what happens in the meantime. Judy Lawrence, I think, has developed a paper which has looked at those sort of transitional gaps, if you like. And I know Tracy May has indicated we're going to sort of look at that. So, you know, apart from that, is there any other work you think we need to do that would sort of, you know, like review plans without a full, like vary plans rather than a full review, just to try and plug any gaps that might?
Dr. Lawrence is an adaptation specialist, and we've already had to have particular regard to the effects of climate change since 2004. So that would have already been incorporated into that. Yeah, that would be my response.
If we have to have regard to the adaptation plan, will that change that?
It's not retrospective, and there's nothing in the 2020 amendment that says that you need to open up an existing plan and review it for compliance.
Yeah, I understand that, but, you know, is there any prospect of us being proactive in that area to do so? I'm just thinking of the current confusion, if you like, where there's joint responsibility for coastal hazards between regional and local authority. And she identified that as one issue where...
That occurs, through you, Madam Chair, that occurs nationally in in some jurisdictions, it should not be an issue in this region because there was a requirement to sort that out in the 1993 amendment. And the role of the regional policy statement is to identify which council has responsibility for natural hazards. And our policy statement does that, and it has done that since 2016. And it says that the regional, there's a default. If it's not explicit, it's a regional function. But the regional council doesn't have the tools like Building Act consents and also subdivision consents. So in effect, there is in some areas a grey area there. But we have attempted to address that through the regional policy statement. And the current regional policy statement says that we retain the control of the use of land for natural hazards in rivers, in the coastal marine area, and in any primary hazard zone. And there's no primary hazard zones that have been identified in the region to date. So that means that it is a district council responsibility under the RPS in our region. I think you've got some solid policy there to fall back on. It's not as confused as in other parts of the country.
So not sure what the definition of a primary hazard zone is, but given the work that's come through, say, from the shoreline management, risk assessments and so on, is there an ability to review where they might apply and where we might take a greater role?
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. That's the purpose of the identification of a primary hazard zone. It is to be done locally, and and Rick, help me out here, the definition is intolerable risk, is it not? And should the areas be identified, then it would occasion a change to the regional policy statement and to the regional plan, because that land use would then require a regional consent, and that would have a limit on it of 35 years. That is the process that was done in Matata. Yeah.
Okay, you happy with that, Dennis?
Well, I'm just thinking of, I'll leave it there. That's fine.
Okay. Thanks very much, both of you. And
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick, for being there to support if needed. It looks like it's Councillor Kneebone just from the order, if that's right. Yep.
So if I've understood that conversation right, because it's almost like a typo here, because it says when preparing or changing regional policy statement plans, you mean regional policy statements and plans, I'm assuming?
It is a typo. Yes.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
And so we are changing our regional plan. So we are going, and I guess my question is, to what extent can we change that and outside of the bounds of what our regional policy statement directs us to do?
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is that it is a review of the coastal plan. The Waikato coastal plan is limited to the coastal marine area. That's from mean high water spring to the territorial sea, boundary of the territorial sea. And that's generally where houses aren't built.
I get that, but I thought we're doing the regional plan as well.
It's following, so it's a staged process.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
So it will come after certain dates.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I thought it was just the coastal plan review that you were referring to.
Yeah. No, we are doing the regional plan, but
it's in early stages of the regional plan review.
Yep.
So
they will have to have, the regional plan review will have to have regard to the emission reduction plan and the adaptation plan, because it will fall after the end of this year.
Correct.
Yeah. When we get to it.
Yeah. Yep. So it can have a broader scope than what the RPS would direct us to, because of the these amendments. Yeah.
The regional plan must give effect to the regional policy statement. That is, and so must district plans as well.
Yeah.
And that is much stronger direction. And that's the same direction as we have relationship with national policy statements and environmental standards.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
Happy with that, Stu? For now?
My brain's quite.
We've probably got time for another question if it comes back to you. Councillor Truck.
Yeah, that has made it much clearer for me, thank you. And on a positive note, I can actually see a future. I can see a light at the end of the tunnel. I think media need to be pushing where we're heading with this, because to me it's very positive, the direction that we're heading now, and at speed, because next year when we do the review of the regional plan and incorporating this, we'll actually see stuff happening on the ground, which is what I've been
It's
asking
always
for a
that
long
delay.
time.
That delay from national direction to actually updating these plans is a bit painful, but we will get there.
But it's being out of this committee for such a long time and stepping back into it now, I can see the huge progress from when it was just mutterings to actually getting implementation is amazing. There's just one other small thing here I'm fascinated with though, and that's on paragraph 35, areas of energy forest and biomass plantings close to final use. Is that just, these pine forests that have been planted and walk away being turned into firewood?
No, through you, Madam Chair. It
you.
relates to the comments you were making before in relation to electric vehicles and burning coal to generate electricity. Genesis at the moment are trialling use of wood pellets in their boilers, in their furnaces to
At Huntley.
generate electricity, and recognising that process heat, that there's money in the budget for converting boilers and similar types of use of heat to biomass as opposed to coal, and so as to prevent emissions from transport. You actually need that close to the use rather than
To the boiler.
Yeah, exactly. And in that respect, there was a paper at the previous meeting of this committee, which I can pass on to you, or you can find it, which actually looked at the opportunities for renewable energy, for solar, for wind, but also for biomass, and recognising that if you're going to generate electricity out of it, you need long-term contracts for energy lots and in close proximity to the final use. And that's what that was meant to reflect. Just a link back to that paper.
And I can jump in there as well. It's not a plant and walk away. It's a plant and harvest in order to produce pellets near a boiler. So that it's a small location.
Areas
it's a local
energy
loop.
Forest. Yeah. Areas for area to turn into firewood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just question mark that one.
All right. I see Dennis has another question, and then I'll have one myself.
I lost my train of thought there and it's come back.
Awesome.
So in terms of this sort of transition arrangements, putting aside the legislative issues, in the Hawke's Bay, an agreement's been made between the two local authorities and the regional council as to the management and operational ongoing forward planning for their scheme, where the regional council will take over that role. So that they've actually signed a deed down there, which allows that to happen. You see that as something that could be extended into our region. And secondly, short of that, when the law reform comes through, will it be the role of the joint committees under the reform to the RMA that might assume that role in the future? No, short of the transitional plans are made in the Hawke's Bay.
Through you, Madam Chair, both those questions I can't answer unequivocally. The first one in relation, do I see anything like what was negotiated in Hawke's Bay occurring in our region? I think that is the benefit of having local adaptation responses, because they deal with local issues. I'm not familiar with the policy settings of the Hawke's Bay RPS, so I don't know what they were constrained by or what envelope they were working within. I can't comment on that one. The second one, the role of the joint committees, I would invite you to consider that maybe it is the role of the instruments that the joint committee are part of developing once it's gone through the process, independent hearings panel and the like. And so it would be the regional spatial strategies that would identify areas, would be directed by the adaptation elements of the national planning framework. And then the combined plans would just provide the regulatory rules for that. But it would, like in all public policy situations, that it works better if you have the right mix of policy levers, and regulation's just one.
And a second question, I know this only came out yesterday, but do you have any interim comments on what the economics?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the same thing.
Partners loved it, didn't they? Yeah, I just saw the headlines today. Ag leaders.
Or around the process as well, if you could remind us what happens with that process going forward, just the dates and things.
Yeah, sure. Through you, Madam Chair, it's definitely has come to us and come to the nation as a very bottom-up approach to dealing with these. One of the consistent advocacy elements that we've had as an organisation is to ensure that individual landowners benefit from their own decisions and their own actions. And so it is consistent with this council's advocacy over at least 10 years, I would suggest, since the ETS has been around, that agriculture is addressed at a property scale. So that's a plus for us. And certainly one of the things that it is again incentive rich, and it's recognises that it's going to take behaviour change. And certainly what we see is no hard and fast, thou shalt use this calculator. There's a number of peak industry groups with calculators, and so the first emphasis is on individual landowners knowing their number. The opportunity is then for activities that mitigate emissions to be addressed in the final levy paid. The two split gas approach is law, so that has been retained. It would have been very difficult to have retained that, I understand, if the ETS only was the mechanism used at a processor level. So in that respect, I think there's been, that's the elements that I see, and I understand that government is going to make a decision following the Climate Commission's evaluation of those recommendations, I think in a month's time.
Yeah, it's
and
coming soon, I think.
The government will make their decision in December. So that's my understanding of where it is at the moment, but I'm just reading it through now.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's early days.
Fair question.
Early days, but good to just cover it off somewhat, because I'm mindful that in one of the first few meetings of the committee, we invited Kelly Forster to come and present to us. And we did offer to be of assistance in any way that they might need. Is there anything you'd like to comment in regards to that?
I think just to wrap it all up, and thank you, Blair, for bringing that all together, as the Chair said, in such a short time frame. Much appreciated, and particularly indicating how it fits into the policy programme and our framework there. So thank you. And just next steps, here are the actions for partners and others. And the advisory group will be going through this to see how we incorporate all of these actions into our work program, what's already in there, what's new, and how do we actually deliver and fund on these. So that will be coming back. With respect to He Waka Eke Noa, yes, we started that discussion. I think that was our first speaking engagement to see how might we work together, because what we are focused on, and indeed staff were talking about this last night, a number of our staff attended presentations during the day yesterday, and we did have a round table via text and messaging. How will we respond to this? Because there is an opportunity, government will be seeking public submissions, and our focus is on working closely with our farming community to enable them to be able to deliver on the plans and expectations that they have agreed to here. So we will be bringing more information back to you.
Yeah, so the supportive stance stands, and that we're here to support the industry. And I'm noticing we're when we talk about that topic, often now, because of the way that it geographically fits together, we often talk about agriculture and forestry together now, while they are separate in our inventory. In my mind, they've come closer together as to how we work with both to support on that, in the same way that transport and urban design, come together. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was curious, Karen, did we actually have quite a bit of interaction with He Waka Eke Noa over the last while as they were working on this, or is it something that they were like, we got this, we've got to do this, but we'll let you know if we need you? Thanks.
It was a partnership between the sector and the government. However, I am aware of a number of touch points. Indeed, our previous CE was an advisor on iwi matters in relation to that, Vaughan. And also our principal economist, Blair Keenan, had been approached on a number of occasions in relation to economic stuff. I met with them a couple of times, but mainly to find out what was going on from my own sort of understanding of where things were, but not in a formal capacity.
Just good to understand. Thank you. Councillor Schwack.
Yeah, lack of understanding on my part. He Waka, what is this organisation?
Yes, sorry, Fred. I remember you were here for some of it as well, so I'll let Karen.
Just
give the big picture.
Specifically, how it blends in with forestry, farming, and assisting that.
So, Councillor Schwack, He Waka Eke Noa was a primary sector, or is the primary sector climate action partnership. So it involves key representatives of the primary sectors, plural, working in tandem with government to develop an emissions pricing scheme that is appropriate and relevant and enables our farming community to continue to grow food for the world in a low emissions economy.
Yep, got that. Yeah, that's just
No, just good.
And following on from that, like what we've been talking about now for a bit, and actually assisting those landowners to get trees in the ground on that unproductive land. And I really want to, see how that, or what potential there is for this council to actually lead that, to get ahead of the game and actually,
be involved.
Be involved, absolutely, to support these landowners that can't afford to do it. And whether that be if we're able to receive carbon payouts, carbon credits for that work initially, to pay that off and then hand it back to the landowners as an asset, what a selling point, let's do it.
But noting that involvement, interest, yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is off the top of my head from what I understand already, but because the ETS has some fairly strict criteria, for entry, minimum size of plot, 1 hectare, minimum size of
Height.
side of a shape of 5 metres
No, we're
height.
talking landowners that want hectares and hectares converted into forestry. Oh,
And
yeah, I know,
because
but just
there
minor
are constraints, it doesn't really suit native regeneration and non-typical or unconventional forestry that some landowners may wish to be involved in. That's where the He Waka e Kanoa opportunity comes in, so that they can reduce the levy that they're assessed at from their stock in a split gas way from the changes that they may wish to do on their land. So by this He Waka e Kanoa process, it may be beneficial for those individual landowners to do it themselves rather than do it collectively, like that would have been the situation if you were only using the ETS. So we've just got to find out about that. And that's my understanding at the moment. I can't answer your question, in other words.
Councillor, that's why it's something that I've been looking into and I'm still furthering my knowledge on, because what came out yesterday under the proposal from He Waka e Kanoa was that you can put plantings in and get recognised for that, and in a separate sphere to the ETS, which is where you're talking about carbon credits, because that has for a long time been identified as, with the restrictive criteria and everything else, as a barrier to a whole lot of pieces of land that need to be planted. So once we understand it more, we can
then council
come
might
back.
have a
then we
role
can have
to
a
play
better
then.
perspective.
Just one other thing, biodiversity, you know, having biodiversity credits, you know, where can we push that as a real thing? Again, taking a lead role. Yeah,
there are quite a lot of people looking into that kind of thing that I'm aware of. And we actually had Dr. David Hall come and speak to us about a year ago, or maybe a little bit less, on that. And I'd be quite interested in hearing where that has moved on to, because as I understand, it's moved on quite a bit, but there are still barriers. So it's, if we can bring something to the next committee on that, because it's ready to, then that's cool. But if it's not, then at the very least, I'll get up to date so that we can have a chat together. Yeah, because I'm really interested in that as well. Yeah. Yeah, including after we understand the He Waka e Kanoa a bit further. Yeah. Thank you. And I mean, my final statement on the emission reduction plan before we pass it is just, of course, I would have loved for it to be bolder, but I am very, very grateful to the fact that there's a lot of agreement on the budgets, the carbon budgets, to allow us to move forward as a nation on that, and the fact that we have this first national emission reduction plan is quite an achievement, and we can only build on it. So it is really cool, as you say, Councillor Chwak. There's actually been a lot in play to come together to move people forward, but as much as possible together, because it touches so many things in our society. All right, in that sense, I see Alejandro's hand is up. I may as well see what he would like to say.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, just to make a note on Councillor Leach's comment, and is the council has, through the submissions on the emissions reduction plan and the national adaptation plan, advocated for what we call enhanced sequestration potential, and that is essentially any biodiversity benefits that come from taking care of a forest in an appropriate manner that are usually not accounted under the ETS. So we have, and council has, in fact, advocated for that to be included in the settings.
Thank you, Alejandro, and really appreciate your work that's come through a lot of the Strategy and Policy Committee on our submissions for all of this. Thank you, Blair, for that presentation. We'll move, and I'll move, and perhaps Councillor Trott seconds to receive the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Last item on the agenda. Yep, we'll bring back Lisa Armstrong
Thank you.
and Karen.
And also, I believe we have Fiona Hunter and Nikki Hamilton online.
Awesome.
Hello, Fiona is our business
Hello.
services advisor manager, business services manager, and Nikki Hamilton is our fleet and facilities team leader. And so both are integrally part of our corporate emissions reduction plan. So
Great.
so I'll just let you open this properly.
Sure. So it's the first 8 months, as I understand, of this financial year to see where our in-house emission reduction plan is up to. And as I can see, it's on track, but there's some detail that we can discuss. So go ahead, Lisa, if there's anything you'd like to say on it so far from the report.
Good morning again. Now, yeah, just to give an overview that at the moment, for the year to date to the 8 months on last year, our reductions are tracking at 15%, and we are on track to achieve our 49% reduction from our base year, which was 2016-2017, when we compile our final results in September, October, which is when we will be carrying out our formal audit and verification process of our corporate emissions. So just to note that this is, Blair was talking about the national direction and, carrying out our functions under the Local Government Act and the RMA Act. This is our own, corporate focus on, reducing our emissions reductions. Nikki and Fiona, who are here online, are the authors of the appendices to this report, where they've outlined their planned approaches for reducing emissions for our by implementing solar arrays across some of our sites and also decarbonising our fleet. So I probably will leave it there, and Madam Chair, I'll just take any questions.
Sure, thanks for that. For me, the main thing that stands out is at the end of paragraph 5 and 16, because of the fact that we're going to be moving to reporting on more of scope 3 emissions, which is of course where it's really exciting, but also would need for us to reassess our baseline and our target, which I'm assuming is something that would happen next triennium then, because the drainage services that we provide and the emissions from that, as well as the public transport emissions, which we did see in the last report, yes. Mindful. I'm really interested to show councillors the relative scale of those to our in-house emissions. And it's like this for many, many organisations, of course, but it's a maturing of it to have the really deep conversations after we've addressed so many of the low-hanging fruit really, really well, really, really quickly. So thank you to everybody involved to make that happen. Any comment on that? Don't have to, but.
Madam Chair, I could just add that for our final emissions reporting, when we pull together all of our emission results, we have taken an approach to compartmentalise each of those new emission groupings, because as you've noted, our corporate emissions of, I think, around 900 or 1,000 tonnes are completely dwarfed when you look at the emissions from our public transport service delivery, or as also our emissions from draining organic soils.
Yeah, no, have separate scales is perfectly fine. Just having them on the page enables the right conversations of what we need to get into. So do I have any of the members? Angela, with a question on this report or comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to Lisa and Fiona and one more person. Sorry, I can't see who you are. For the report. Just wondering, just had a question. We've got our public transport plan coming up for renewal, and we're looking at possibly offsetting some of our emissions to move from net zero to possibly carbon negative. Just interested in your thoughts on that, and also just if we're looking at offsetting some of those unavoidable emissions moving forward. Hope that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, it does make sense, Angela. Like I commented earlier on, local offsets is obviously something that we should explore. Karen.
I was just going to confirm that we are seeking some advice and we're doing some work on looking at the potential for local offsets so that we can address the issues that you have raised with respect to transport, those matters that can't be reduced straight away. So how do we offset, but how do we also ensure that we get those multiple benefits in our region across improving water quality, increasing biodiversity, and also addressing our emissions. So this is some work that, again, part of the conversation we were having last night as a staff group, how do we progress this at pace? Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that, Angela?
Yeah, I am, Karen. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, just really interested in the local stuff, obviously, and I know that it's dear to Fred's heart as well. So you're just wondering, about those co-benefits of how we can, make it practical and more affordable, I suppose, for everyone involved. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Teague.
Yeah, thanks. It's really good to see we're on track with our emission reductions. And thanks for putting these two appendices together, which provide some information. I suppose I'd like to drill down a bit more, and I wonder, especially Nikki, if you're in charge of the fleet, whether we could get together and have a conversation around that, so I can, drill down a bit more into the detail, because I'm particularly interested in how quickly we're transitioning to fully electric in particular. But maybe you could, or somebody could just give us some indication of how many fully BEVs, they call them, fully electric vehicles we are purchasing this year and in the subsequent years, and similarly with plug-in hybrid. Maybe some indication about the models that have been.
Did you hear that, Nikki?
Sorry, it did cut out for me. I heard about requesting the number of EVs, I think it was for this financial year. Is that correct?
Yes, in subsequent years, and similarly for plug-in hybrids.
Okay, so for this financial year, expecting for 4 additional EVs to be delivered to us. We are currently just sitting behind on our current purchases, but an additional 17 PEVs will be for this financial year as well. We've already purchased 4 PEVs, so that will be in addition to those. Next financial year, off the top of my head, sorry, I'm not 100%, I think it is an additional 4 EVs and 7 PEVs, but I would have to confirm that figure for you.
Right. Thank you. One of the things I picked up from looking at other documentation, if there's some, well, first of all, a question, is there some element of choice for staff as to what vehicle they might want in terms of a employment package? Is there some element of choice that the staff exercise as to what sort of vehicle they want?
These are on-contract vehicles you're speaking about versus tool of trade vehicles?
Yeah, the ones where it's part of an employment package, and do staff have some choice as to what they choose?
There is a policy in place for ELT members who've got contract vehicles, and there are restrictions around those which support council's emissions. So hybrids, EVs and plug-ins are the only options available to them.
Right. So other than that, it's just, you have to use the pool that's provided. Do I understand that correctly?
And through our AOG agreement, correct.
Right. Are you finding there's any sort of reluctance? Well, there's very few electric vehicles. Anticipating reluctance from some to use an electric vehicle because they don't quite understand. They might have range anxiety and that sort of thing.
In relation to ELT, no. We've got quite good open communication with them, so we explain a lot of the ins and outs of vehicles and we have them trial them. We actually also have people come on site and we'll sit down with them and explain how things work. So it's more around how the vehicles are operating regarding towing capability that are more restricted versus their willingness to go EV.
And broadly for the staff generally?
Staff do not get an option of the type of vehicle that they use. We go through a full fit for purpose review along with off-road utilisation information to basically identify the best suited vehicle for the job that they are required to do.
Right. Is there any thought to, allowing staff to trial vehicles so they take them away for a day rather than just sort of drive them around the block, sort of get over those initial hesitations, if you like?
We have, when we introduce EVs within our fleet, we actually have Hyundai New Zealand coming down and they'll be doing full inductions with all of our staff prior to using them. In addition, my team of 3 will be working with staff to encourage them to use EVs because it will become a time where EV will be the only option available to them.
Right. And then a question around the liability of the reliability, I suppose, of the emission standards for PHEVs. And I'm aware that there are, I don't think they've been promulgated, but in the EU, they're almost certainly going to change the emission standards for these vehicles because while the manufacturer might say they have a certain emission profile, when they're actually trialled in the real world, they have much higher emissions than what the manufacturers have been telling them, because people tend not to charge them up as much as they should, particularly in a fleet operation scenario. And also even things like if you turn the air conditioning on, you're going to engage the petrol engine, which isn't taken into account. I'm just wondering how lined up we are with that new emerging data that's coming through from Europe in terms of our choice as to whether we, in fact, buy these vehicles in the future.
Good question and good points. When we go through, you are correct, especially in the old days when Mitsubishi Outlanders would have a 40-45 kilometre range, you'd see that once that range was gone, they're operating at 13 litres per 100 Ks.
Yeah, right.
So if you had a driver who would be travelling 30 Ks, 40 Ks down the road and going on petrol for 200 kilometres, it very much changed the rate of which litre you would go through. This is very much changing. You can actually go to Mitsubishi New Zealand and ask them what their rate is once it's operating solely on petrol and without any EV assistance, and they'll give you a rate which is still considerably lower. I think it's around about 3.5 litres. When we go to buy these vehicles, we look at the utilisation that we've used. So we're gaining the data of our vehicles through GPS, which tells us what the average journey is on our trips. And that helps us identify the type of fleet that we make up. So a lot of our journeys, 60, 70 kilometres, is actually enough for them. And we've also got supported infrastructure in place at other areas that we can use. So it does become part of the equation that we're using along with the driver training. But you are correct. And that new system, I think, is actually due to roll out soon in New Zealand about the ratings.
So do you monitor whether staff actually do charge them up when they should?
We currently only have them with allocated staff, and so what we do is each month we get a report that comes through that tells us what their fuel consumption and mileage travelled is, and that gives us an estimate of how many litres they're using. So we have a variance, and once it goes above that level, we basically have conversations with drivers to understand what's occurring and if that vehicle would still be fit for purpose or what we would need to look at doing.
I'm just looking at the chart. It's on in Appendix 2, and it's got ICE vehicles and BEVs and PHEVs. It seems to be indicating that we will still have in our fleet, even by 2026, 2027, quite a considerable number of fully ICE vehicles. I suppose we have to keep this under review. I've just seen some statistics where now fully electric vehicles make up 11% of the global fleet, which is a 60% increase from the year before, which sort of suggests that we're on an exponential curve. We're at the sort of base of an exponential curve, and this adoption is going to come. I mean, if you transpose that, and it may not be that rapid, but 60% a year annualised would mean we'll be in fully electric vehicles much sooner than this chart would suggest. So I suppose what I'm saying is we do really need to keep this under review, because this transition may in fact happen a lot more quickly than any of us imagine. Any comment on that?
Yes, I think we also have to keep into consideration that our fleet is 70% utes, tool of trade vehicles. So once we get a vehicle indication, a strong indication of when those vehicles will be available, that can have the towing capacity and weight capacity, keeping in mind that batteries add quite a large amount of weight onto our vehicles, and you're putting a 400 kg spray unit on the back, is that once those fit for purpose utes come in, we will see that transition plan happening. But right now, that transition is looking the way it is because most of our SUVs and smaller passenger fleet can go EV, but there's just no option as of yet to go to a hybrid or EV ute, and that's why it would be reflecting in that chart.
Thanks, Nikki. So would you say that at the very least it's reviewed annually and, you know, as part of this process of the emission reduction plan, or more frequent?
More frequent. So every time we purchase a vehicle, we check to see what is on the market, what is available, and what's fit for purpose, and then we go through that process.
Okay, I have one very last question from Dennis Tegg, who has exercised his interest in EVs.
So is there an option of leasing those types of vehicles now so that we can transition more rapidly when they do become available? In other words, we don't get locked into purchase contracts that extend a fully petrol vehicle beyond when these other alternatives come available.
The vehicles that you're seeing, the utes that we're actually purchasing, we purchase at a phenomenal rate. So leasing them would actually become more expensive to council than owning them and selling them off shortly afterwards. Especially on our utes with the Ford Rangers, the loss on sale after 12 months to 2 years is minimal in comparison to the other vehicles that we could purchase. So leasing, it could be an option, but it would be at a higher cost to council.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Nikki. Great answers today. Really enjoyed having you along this time around. I've actually got a question on the solar stuff, but I see Councillor Kneebone's light on, so I'm going to let him go first.
Investment, those Ford Rangers, Dennis. Hey, I'm assuming our vehicle emissions calculations include the chair's car.
Yes, all vehicles provided.
All counts.
Yeah, because there's a fuel card that goes with it, isn't there?
That's
Yeah.
right.
and this isn't an attempt to put councillors against councillors, but what I'm just wondering whether we should, because I'm also assuming they don't include individual councillors, because there's no way of connecting our mileage claims and calculating that into this. But I just wonder if we should think about a way of doing that, not to penalise councillors that live further out, but councillors in Taupo and what have you, but more to encourage us to think about our whether or not we need to travel.
Our own travel plan, you effectively mean, for councillors?
And incentivise us to carpool. You know, I've been dragged in here on a number of times, probably because I live a bit closer than, say, Fred or Dennis does, for a half-hour meeting, you know, where that could really have been done online, you know, so we tend not to think about the true cost of travelling, But I just wonder whether it's something we should think about, and just so that we can, as councillors, on the same page as what we're expecting from staff, you know.
Yes, that's quite a consistent message I often say as well when we've got something going for staff, that the councillors also, especially for our own culture, to be more aligned in what we experience.
I would have thought there was a way of using our mileage claims, our kilometres, and to have some maybe somewhat crude mechanism to sheet that.
Councillor Kneebone, it would be very easy for us to be able to calculate your emissions based on the claims. That's pretty much how we account for our emissions.
Yeah, we just need to make sure that we're not picking on those that have no choice but to drive from Taupo.
And it's never, ever meant to be finger pointing or
No.
punitive exercise. It's actually just about awareness.
It's a
And
travel
when you
plan.
have
Yeah.
when you have awareness, you make choices.
And incentivizing the right choices, not the not the selfish choices. Yeah.
I imagine it was music to Angela's ears, and she's just put her hand up. So telepathic, you knew you wanted to say something, Angela. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks. Just on all that travel planning, just thinking about our staff and how we offer half price PT and really good end of journey facilities downstairs for micro mobility. Just wondering on Dennis's point about comms and that sort of thing. Just wondering if highlighting what we offer for our staff and I don't know how we were talking about measuring our own emissions getting to work or working from home when we can. If it would be a good idea to measure staff's as well, or does that already happen? They're travelling to and from work.
Through you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Strange, as part of the planning to move into this new building, there was a travel plan prepared and there was a challenging target created for that. And so we will be reviewing that, I'll check that, but with all the disruption owing to COVID, I think it's probably time to revisit the plan from scratch in essence. But yes, it's certainly something that has been factored into this discussion. And as part of our ongoing reporting for our corporate emissions, this will be something that will be reported in the future. Certainly not in the next year, but maybe subsequent inventories.
Yeah, so on that, as perhaps an action point to take away, having a think about the turn of the triennium coming and the fact that when the kind of conversations we have with staff, if we could look at how we build that into the induction for the new councillors as well, because it's the experiential thing around that being a topic that gets talked about with us, that then embeds it into our behaviour a bit more. I mean, to the same degree that its staff would experience it, would be really appreciated. Councillor Truck.
Yeah, and look, when it comes to budgets, and travel allowance from Raglan to here, I'm very aware of the costs, and I prefer to stay home. But again, until we got a system that works,
internet connectivity, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not. It's too frustrating. So you weigh up the cost versus benefit, and this is governance, and you've got to be here. And when it comes to being penalised for doing those extra miles because of the distance I live away, is very apparent. We should be measured from ground zero, from here, and where we travel, not from Kathy coming from Taupo or me coming from Raglan, and then Barry or the finance minister's looking at our travel budgets. And of course we're going to be that much higher, but we're penalised for that.
I understand. And we've got obviously a piece in, I think it's Risk and Assurance Committee, where that tends to get looked at. But I think the messages have come across of what we're interested in.
And staff thing, sorry to staff, I was fascinated yesterday when I was in the Hamilton City Gardens doing the plant thing, and I asked the question, why haven't we got our regional council staff representatives here? And I was told, oh no, they're all coming across to Tauranga. It's in Hamilton now, so I'm not quite sure, if you hop in one of our vehicles and zoom across the other side of the country, whether it's very effective, but they may be completely busy and there's no alternative. But that was the first thing that popped in my mind was, travel distance.
Thank you. Angela, see your hands up again.
Oh yeah, thanks, Chair. Just probably more around the travel planning was to sort of show our leadership in that area. I know that there are other councils who maybe have tried to put in travel planning for their staff and have been knocked back. But yeah, I just think that it's a really good example of what can happen if you incentivize staff yeah, to use alternative means. And also just the discounts that we that were available to staff to purchase e-bikes and other micromobility. Just keen to know if that's still available, and also, like Jen said, moving into the new triennium, making sure that that is available for new councillors as well moving forward.
Thank you. I'm taking that on board. Karen tells me, so it's great. My question around the solar was actually to do with, since we're looking at putting panels on our buildings, whether the people we engaged to analyse that had any feedback on potential benefits of battery systems, and just as to whether that would then help us to reduce our bills. I'm sure we've already gone through this. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can probably answer that one. So I can't recall where we got to with the actual battery design, but the consultants looked at our infrastructure, our previous trends on energy usage, and came up with a design and spec for the best solar, I guess, design and technical solution that would give us the most efficient and cost-effective installation design, and that was the options that they presented to us. So they would have considered all of the options, including battery, and have presented the best option to us.
And I suppose the nature of a business building versus a home building is that you're just not going to use it when it's dark as much. So
exactly, and during the
stack
day,
up in the same way.
No, so all our energy usage is during the day, whereas at home, you're right, you need that battery backup for your evening usage.
Okay, just something to think about, maybe long term, would be if we did, let's say we did support going down more of a community-owned energy pathway. I'd be interested to see whether anything that we have on our buildings could be utilised to be the land, I suppose, part or even battery storage area of that kind of network to our local community that our buildings are situated in. So it's kind of a blue sky forward-thinking thing, but just keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Obviously got to flesh that out as to what our part of all of that will be.
Yeah, and our first part is to get our buildings fitted out, and then we can consider how we can better utilise that going forward.
Absolutely. Councillor Teague.
Just two final little comments.
Thank you.
Could we please remove the sign writing on the chair's car, which is hybrid electric? It's not electric. It doesn't have a plug. So that would be a good start. I think it's false advertising. And secondly, can we seriously think about, going forward for the triennium, that the chair's car is fully electric? I think that would be a really sort of leadership position to take. And secondly, I noticed that Bay of Plenty Regional Council with its fully electric vehicles are emblazoned with lots of sort of sign writing about the functions that the council carries out. They're sort of movable billboards, and I just wonder whether we could consider doing something similar. No, you're getting a negative reaction from Karen. No. Oh, good.
Stu, could I just get a red light? Thank you. Oh, yeah.
That wasn't a negative reaction. That was just a smile of recognition. This is a discussion that we have frequently and have had frequently over the years about moving billboards. And from the marketing and branding research that's been done, in actual fact, it doesn't always pan out that way. So our marketing and comms team have looked at this very carefully over the years, and certainly they revisit it regularly and frequently, and based on the research, they would make decisions and recommendations. So you'll notice that some of our vehicles are very specific, like the navigation safety or the maritime safety officers. Their vehicles actually say what they do, so that when people see them around the region. They know why they're there and what they're doing. Similarly, plant pest officers would have the same sort of branding. So yes, it comes, and where it's appropriate, it's applied.
Okay, thank you. So those points taken into consideration.
So I was just trying to
Councillor
understand what's wrong with having hybrid electric written on the car, because that's the Toyota's branding, not ours.
Can we take that one offline?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
That's all right. It's just, we'll take it offline, that one.
Yes.
It's not necessary. Yeah. Do I have anybody else? Oh, I'm just getting into detail. On that, then, thank you very much, Lisa, for presenting this piece on our corporate emission reduction plan. It's so good to see that it's on track, and really looking forward to seeing the end of financial year ones, possibly before the end of the training, and then including the scope 3 stuff, which is cool. Thanks so much. If I could have Councillor Strange move and Councillor Kneebone second.
Yes.
That's all right. And then all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks very much, everyone, for today. It's exactly 12 o'clock, so we're finished half an hour early, but we had a kind agenda for us on that. Really appreciate your contributions.
Councillor Kneebone, do not